I'm going to give my summary of the first three WrestleManias, WrestleMania 1 through 3. And, you know, for those of you who are newer fans, you know, you didn't grow up during that time. It's hard to appreciate the surrounding context in which WrestleMania was born. And because when you understand that context, you'll understand better the card, the WrestleMania 1 card. Because when you look at WrestleMania 1, they didn't use all their talent on that card. You had the British Bulldogs who sat out, Ken Patera, Don Morocco. Trying to think of who else. But those are like three that stood out to me at that time. And whereas later WrestleMania cards, you had most, if not all, of the talent, name talent at least, would be put on the card. You know? And there's a reason for that. WrestleMania 1 was the WWF's attempt to become a cultural phenomenon. That was the importance of this event. It wasn't just any supercard, because before and after there's been a lot of supercards that had, you know, better matches or, you know, better cards, more stacked cards, even made more money when it, you know, with the advent of pay-per-view and whatnot. WrestleMania 1 wasn't an attempt to surpass the previous Starcades or Parade of Champions in terms of a stacked card, you know, or anything like that. WrestleMania 1 was strictly an attempt for the WWF to establish itself as a bona fide cultural phenomenon in the American mainstream. That was the goal. The WWF had already was already on its way to doing that, and it was on its way to doing that because of the Rock and Wrestling connection. You know, with the Brawl to Settle It All, with Cyndi Lauper managing Wendy Richter, Captain Lou Albano managing Fabulous Moolah, and that match was on MTV. Then later, you know, you had the awards in Madison Square Garden in December, where famously, I think Piper smashed Captain Lou Albano over the head with the award he got. David Wolf was in the ring, Dick Clark. And then you had a little melee ensue. Piper body slams David Wolf, Cyndi Lauper's manager. You had the War to Settle the Score in February, which was the setup for WrestleMania 1. And that was when Mr. T interfered in a match. Well, Paul Orndorff interfered first in a match with Piper and Hogan, and then that was on MTV. T then came to the ring after Cyndi Lauper had, and that set up WrestleMania 1. So WWF was already building up to being a cultural phenomenon. They were already crossing over. They were the talk of the town. Wrestling was chic. So it already was establishing itself as a cultural phenomenon. But WrestleMania 1 was to be that stamp, that final stamp of approval, that here we are and we're here to stay. We are pro wrestling. We are here in the popular culture to stay. Okay? So that's important to understand when you see the card. Okay, it wasn't never meant to be a stacked card where you had all the talent in WWF on the show and you had 12 matches. There were 9 matches, and there was a purpose to every one of them. This is why WrestleMania 1 is my favorite WrestleMania. WrestleMania 3 is right along with it. But, like, if you want to see the best WrestleMania, in my opinion, in terms of matches and just overall atmosphere, you go to WrestleMania 3. Nothing beats 93,000 fans. I know some people say that was a little, you know, extra. But let's just say 93,000 at the Silverdome. You can't beat that. You cannot beat that, guys. However, if you want to see an event, history in the making, of a brand becoming a bona fide seal of approval cultural phenomenon, then you go to WrestleMania 1. I mean, I compare it like this. The Chicago Bears of 1985, they marched into New Orleans in the Superdome at Super Bowl 20, having become a cultural phenomenon. But they had to win that game against the Patriots. They had to win that game. They lose to the Patriots, they get upset, which was a possibility. The Patriots were a scrappy team that played good defense, had a very strong running game. So it was possible. Had the Bears lost that game, then all of the cultural crossover stuff that happened in 1985, the Super Bowl Shuffle, the Refrigerator Perry, that would have went out the window. Nobody would have remembered that. It would have been a footnote in history. But because they won the Super Bowl, they established themselves as either the best team ever in the history for 1 year in the history of football, or close to the best, and definitely the best defense for 1 year. So that's what I compare. WWF was already a cultural phenomenon, crossing over into MTV. You had celebrities attending the matches at the Garden, but they had to have a successful WrestleMania 1 to have that stamp of that seal of approval, that final seal that here we are pop culture, we are American mainstream entertainment, and that's WrestleMania 1. The only thing that can ruin it is if something went wrong. And for WrestleMania 1, more so than the Chicago Bears, a lot could go wrong. Why? Because there was already issues with Mr. T, even on the day of the show, not wanting to go into the ring because of fear of getting double-crossed by Roddy Piper or Paul Orndorff, who I guess, there was, you got to remember at this time in pro wrestling, there was a lot of excitement and tension in the air in pro wrestling. Why? Because Vince McMahon was going into his second year of his national expansion. Wrestlers were jumping ship from other territories and going to the WWF and then going back. There was a lot of turnover at this time, a lot of uncertainty. The territories were praying that this would fail, right? They were praying this would fail because they knew, had WrestleMania 1 been successful, that they were going to have the fight of their life with the WWF. So they were praying that it was going to fail, right? So there was a lot riding on this event, believe it or not. There was a lot riding on this event. So, because I remember at the time, and I at this time when I'm as a kid watching this go on, I'm not aware there's even any other territories, but now looking back and watching other territory shows from this time period, you see the tension. You see Bill Watts publicly talk about the WWF. So you have Mr. T, an actor, and now a lot of people again today, you have to appreciate the time of 1985. There was cable TV, which cable TV wasn't the main form of entertainment, it was regular TV. Cable TV was just a supplement, which a lot of people still didn't have in 1985. I didn't. So Mr. T was the main attraction on a show called The A-Team, which at that time was like a cultural phenomenon itself, one of the most popular shows. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have social media, so your entertainment culture was on regular TV, and then on a smaller scale cable. It wasn't like today. Today's celebrities is no big deal. I mean, you got tons of them now, right? Because you have so many different ways to be a celebrity. And we know so much about celebrities, so there's no more mystique. Back then, there was a mystique about celebrities. So, he's a huge star, right? Huge star. Obviously, Cyndi Lauper was a huge star back then. So Vince has got two of the biggest pop culture stars gonna appear, who have been working and appearing on shows, but now they'll be in his biggest show. So what could have messed this up was Mr. T no showing, and Jimmy Snuka was waiting in the wings, likely to be that substitute. And I love Jimmy Snuka. He's my favorite wrestler of all time, and I was a huge Snuka mark. Still am. But although Snuka replacing T would have been pleasing to the traditional wrestling fan, it would have been a huge disappointment to the casual WWF fan or the chic audience that was starting to intake pro wrestling. Or something goes wrong in the ring. Mr. T is just awful, because you got to remember, Mr. T was an athlete, but it's a different thing in pro wrestling. You know, Mr. T had a great look. Apparently he fought some tough man contests, but pro wrestling's a different animal. He could have messed up big time. And so we're going to talk about that match, but first I just want to give you a surrounding context in which WrestleMania 1 was born, to understand why the card was formatted the way it was. Vince wanted the two main matches, which was Hulk Hogan, Mr. T against Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff, and then Leilani Kai against Wendy Richter. These are the two Rock and Wrestling Connection matches. He wanted these matches highlighted and featured, so it made sense why he wouldn't stack the card. Okay, he didn't need to, because these were the matches that the mainstream pop culture were talking about and wanted to see. And of course, as wrestling fans, you're going to see it, because it's, even as a wrestling fan, you want to see this match. And there was other things too that, you know, there was other good stuff on there. Just to show you how big this event was, the night before Hulk Hogan and Mr. T host Saturday Night Live. I mean, that's a huge crossover, guys. That is huge. That is huge. Unheard of for pro wrestling, at least in the modern era at that time, up until that point, because I think from the, you know, late 50s through the like 1984, pro wrestling was pretty much just in the basement subculture, a successful subculture, but a subculture nonetheless that, you know. And of course, they had appeared on other shows leading up to the event, Richard Bowser, whatnot. Then you had the Dr. D, David Schultz, John Stossel incident on 2020 that happened in December of '84. I think it got aired in January '85. That was a big deal. So the WWF had this momentum, and you know what? The 2020 thing, it worked to the WWF's favor. It didn't hurt the WWF at all. You had this momentum, this positive momentum leading up to this event. And all Vince had to do is execute it successfully to accomplish his goal of getting that final seal of approval, that final seal and stamp that the WWF was a mainstream pop culture phenomenon that was here to stay. It was just like the Bears going into the Super Bowl against the Patriots. They had to win that game, even though they were already a pop culture phenomenon. They had to win that game. So, the first match is Tito Santana against Buddy Rose, which was the Mass Executioner. And, you know, people that they say, well, why was Tito put in against the Max Executioner? What you don't realize is that, again, WrestleMania 1 wasn't just about having all the name talent on there, slapping them together in matches. No. There's a purpose to every match. This match had a purpose because Tito Santana wins by figure 4, serving a notice to Greg Valentine, as it was even said in commentary. Because remember, 2 weeks before this, Valentine and Santana had a lumberjack match for the Intercontinental title. So, Tito's match and Greg Valentine's match against Junkyard Dog was used as a vehicle to further their feud, to give it more life, because it was going to lead up to Tito winning the Intercontinental title in a few months. That was the purpose. I might be going a little out of order here, but from what I remember, the next match was Ricky Steamboat against Maniac Matt Bourne. Again, Steamboat was new to the WWF. He was new. And they gave him a good opponent, Matt Bourne. And Steamboat looked great. Steamboat looked fantastic, and I believe the WWF was using this to feature Steamboat as a formal national introduction to WWF fans. Even though he had already appeared on TV, this was his formal introduction, and he looked great. He did the body press off the top, beat Bourne. I mean, Steamboat looked phenomenal, in phenomenal shape. And it was a perfect match to introduce Steamboat to the WWF national audience. Same thing with Bundy and SD Jones. Bundy wins in quote-unquote, was it 9 seconds? It's supposed to be, a record. And he beats SD Jones, another quality opponent. A guy who was like a high-level jobber. And Bundy gets over huge. Again, Bundy had already been on WWF TV for about a month and a half, like Steamboat, but this was his former national introduction. Okay? So every match so far has a purpose to it, a meaningful purpose. I think then the next one, if I'm not mistaken, I'm probably out of order here, but it's pretty much within reason. You have Brutus Beefcake against David Sammartino with Johnny Valiant, and Bruno Sammartino in the respective corners of their proteges. And man, even in 1985, the Garden fans loved Bruno Sammartino. This guy was beloved. Probably, pound for pound, Bruno Sammartino is the most popular wrestler in WWF history. You got to remember, Bruno was champion for 8 years the first time around, 63 to 71. Then 4 years, 73 to 77. And then he's headlining Shea Stadium against Zbyszko 1980. And you got to remember, Bruno Sammartino didn't have a big marketing machine behind him. Fans just authentically loved the guy. And you see that here. And I thought it was an awesome match. I think it put Brutus over good, who's, he had been in the WWF for about half a year by that point. But it put him over pretty good. It gave, I think they were attempting to get David over. And, David looked good in this match. He didn't end up panning out. And then it just gave Bruno, it just was a pop, man, to have Bruno there. So I believe that was a good solid, match in terms of just accomplishing, bringing Bruno in, having him part of the first WrestleMania, deservedly so, getting that pop, giving Brutus something meaningful, because they're about to push Brutus along with Greg, they're about to push Brutus and give him the World Tag Titles. Then you have JYD, Junkyard Dog, against Greg Valentine. Now, JYD's another guy who had been there about a half year by this point. And at the time, I remember thinking, why don't they just have Valentine versus Tito again? Now, I didn't realize they had just had Valentine versus Tito 2 weeks before at the Garden in a lumberjack match. So it made sense. They had Valentine against Junkyard Dog with, again, the purpose of furthering the Santana-Valentine feud, because Valentine obviously, quote-unquote, cheats to win. Foot on the ropes. It's a fun little match, too. This is a fan. JYD was over with the fans. This is the peak, probably, of JYD's popularity in the WWF around, 85, 84, late 84, 85, into very early 86. And Santana comes down to the ring and tells the ref, hey, man, this guy cheated, Valentine. And Valentine, I just loved it, man. He had that green Intercontinental belt, turns beet red, and he's pissed. And and the fans were hot for that moment. And so it was awesome. It was awesome. But it gave further life to the Valentine Santana feud, because they're going to end up, trading the belt. Valentine was going to drop the belt to Santana in the cage in Baltimore. Okay, then you have, I don't know which came first. Let's just say Andre the Giant, Big John Studd. Now, I remember this match had a lot riding on it, because it was retirement versus $15,000. If Andre could slam stud, $15,000. Or if he couldn't, he would retire. And so it had a lot riding on it, right? And it was what it was. By this time, Andre was past his prime from a physical standpoint, but he had the awesome presence. Just huge. And just a tremendous presence still. And you have stud, Bobby Heenan. And it was what it was. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be a great match by any means, but it had drama in it because everybody's waiting for the body slam. And then, of course, Andre throwing the money into the crowd out of that WWF little gym bag. It's a pretty awesome moment. So again, that match meant something. Then you have the tag title match, Wyndham and Rotundo, who I loved as a tag team. I loved Wyndham and Rotundo. I thought that, to this day, that was Rotundo's peak, his best role ever in wrestling. The U.S. Express against Sheik and Volkov. At that time, I remember as a kid, the Iron Sheik was the one wrestler who put fear in me as a kid. This seemed so intimidating, especially when he wore those long shorts with the Iran, and they win the tag titles. And I thought this was a great booking because you have the baby faces, the heels. This is a match where the heels come out on top, and the baby faces take the hit because obviously the top two matches, the Rock and Wrestling Connections, the baby faces win. So this is a great way to give the heels, a big win. And of course they do it with the cane, interference from Blassie. So I thought this was a real good, way to get the titles on the Sheik and Volkov. Now again, I'm just doing this from memory because I actually haven't watched the event in quite a while. And now that I'm talking about it, I just want to watch it. By the way, I thought this was, Jesse was great on commentary. Jesse the Body. I appreciate the early days of Jesse on commentary because he wasn't over the top for the hills. So this is really Jesse at his best. 1985 Jesse was awesome on commentary. Even later he was, but he just got more heelish. So now you have the Rock and Wrestling Connection matches, and of course Leilani Kai, Wendy Richter, and it's pretty awesome because you have Wendy Richter coming out to Girls Just Want to Have Fun, Cyndi Lauper, and Wendy. I thought it was a good one. I was a big Wendy Richter fan, by the way. I had a poster. I met her at Universal Studios when they were doing that promotion in 1985. Where two wrestlers would come out, Universal Studios. You could meet the wrestlers. You get a free action figure. So I remember I got Iron Sheik. My sister, who did she get? Or I got Jimmy Snuka. She got Iron Sheik. Something to that effect. And I was a big women's wrestling fan, and I loved Wendy Richter. And she won the match. I thought it was a good match. And now we go to the main event. We're going to talk about this because I was mentioning what could go wrong. Now, obviously, Piper and Orndorff convinced T that they weren't going to shoot on him, and T works the match. T looked great. He looked great. I think he looked great. Like, he looked in shape. He looked cut. I thought his wrestling gear looked good. And actually, I got to give it to T. He looked real good in this match. He looked real good, looked credible. He looked credible. And just the intensity in this match. The intensity. To me, I've always judged future celebrity involvement matches by this match. Because of how good Mr. T looked, how well he performed for a novice, the intensity, that stare down with Piper, and just the intensity of the match itself, was awesome. And you have Superfly in the corner, Orton, You know, Muhammad Ali on the outside of the ring, Pat Patterson refereeing. I mean, it was just an awesome atmosphere. Seeing Mr. T, Hogan, and Snuka come down the aisle, the Eye of the Tiger. Piper, Orndorff, and Orton with the, Scotty the Brave, and with all the, the bagpipers. I mean, it was just an awesome event. Not overdone, done just right. Just the right amount of celebrities there, and the right celebrities. And it was a good, solid match with a lot of drama and electricity. And of course, we know the finish. Orndorff gets, hit with the cast. Hogan pins him. Piper and Orton leave Orndorff in the middle of the ring. And they try to revive, Hogan, T, and Snuka try to revive Orndorff. Orndorff is discombobulated. And setting up, obviously, the face turn of Orndorff, which I thought was a great face turn. And WrestleMania 1 accomplished what it set out to do. Now, let's talk about a little bit post WrestleMania 1, because the live show attendance for a couple months after WrestleMania 1 was down because, remember, WrestleMania 1 was closed-circuited everywhere. And you have a big event like that, it's closed-circuited or pay-per-viewed, there tended to be a post-cooling off period. Because everything peaked, everything built to a peak. It reaches peak, so then there's naturally after a cooling off period. Fans were built up to this crescendo. They saw the big event, and now it's kind of like, it's kind of like, I don't like to say anticlimactic, but it's a resting period. So it took a couple months for that to kind of take its course. And then in the summer, WWF popped all over the country. I mean, the attendance went through the roof. But how I knew WrestleMania 1 was a successful event, even then, when it was announced that they would appear on NBC on Saturday night's main event and preempt Saturday Night Live, I knew wrestling. I knew the WWF and wrestling was here to stay. I knew that was the WWF had arrived. They had WrestleMania 1 at that point when I heard they were going to be on Saturday night's main event, that they were going to preempt Saturday Night Live. I knew WrestleMania, WWF WrestleMania had accomplished its goal. That WWF was now a cultural phenomenon and a mainstream national phenomenon. They were here to stay. That whole year of 1985, you have the WWF Saturday morning cartoons. Again, you have the wrestlers going to Universal Studios, making appearances in 1985. The WWF had accomplished its goal with WrestleMania 1. They had arrived. They had established themselves as a mainstream American pop culture phenomenon. That they were not just a fad, which that would have been had WrestleMania 1 failed. Everything they did up to that point with MTV would have just been a footnote in history. And that's what happened. Such an important event. And I think the promoters at that point, they knew they still had a chance to fight Vince, but they knew it was going to be an uphill battle. Because I think they were hoping it will fail. I think a lot of promoters at that time thought it was going to be a fad. The wrestling rock and wrestling connection, the popularity, the cross-cultural popularity of the WWF. A lot of them believed it was going to be a fad, and it would have been had WrestleMania 1 failed, but it didn't. Instead, it cemented the WWF as the name-branded pro wrestling. It's a mainstream phenomenon. And the WWF was like a freight train at that point. And there's a lot of other stuff that was going on in the wrestling world that political goings on. Not everything was perfect for Vince in 1985 because he ended up selling the WTBS time slot, which had he held on to, would have cemented his grip on monopolizing the wrestling world in 1985. But maybe he had to sell it. I don't know. Maybe I heard he needed the money, and so selling it to Crockett, and Crockett was able to go national and really fight Vince. But WrestleMania 1, it was super important in establishing the WWF as the name brand of pro wrestling as a cultural phenomenon. But that'll be it. I'm just going to review. I said WrestleManias 1 through 3. We'll do WrestleMania 2 next. All right, bye.